Since the last video, I've been across the Atlantic. I've seen family and friends. I've put an eyebrow-raising amount of chocolate into a bag and put it back through US Customs. I have done a lot of the plumbing in the van. I have done lighting, as you can see here. There's mattresses have arrived. We'll talk about a lot of these today, but of all of these things, there's one thing that brings me particular happiness and pleasure, and it's almost the simplest thing. It's just having a very convenient place to put my drink. Welcome back to me, building a van. Hello and welcome back once again to the van build. Now it's been a little bit of time since the last video, and as you can see behind me I've been pretty busy with the interior fit out of the van. One of the reasons for the delay is that it's been a lot of very small bits and pieces and minutiae. It's kind of hard to talk about those individually, and so towards the end of the video today I'll go into some more general wrap up and go through some of the bigger things I've done in the rest of the van outside of the main topic, because the main topic for today is plumbing. It's kind of the last major system of the van I have yet to talk about, so I'm going to give a good portion of this video over to that and to its two particular subsystems. First of all, to the water plumbing for both supplying fresh water and collecting grey water from the sink and the shower, and also to the gas, as in propane, not gasoline, plumbing for supplying gas, propane to my air furnace for heating the air and to my cooktop in the kitchen for cooking meals on. So let's talk through some high-level detail of both of those first, and then we'll go inside the van and look in all the nooks and crannies and see some of the actual details of the system as it stands. So let's start with water and the supply side, the fresh water side. Now, of course, you start here with where the water supply is. This van is built to go off-grid, so it's not guaranteed to have any kind of water supply hooked up to it at all. And so naturally it needs a pretty big fresh water tank that can last, let's say, about a week away from the grid. Now that is located over the passenger side wheel well. You can just about see it there behind me, but we'll go and zoom in on it in a second. And that holds 32 US gallons of water, which is more than enough for a couple of people off grid for about a week. That then feeds into a pump and filter and pressurization system. We'll go through that as well, and then splits off into a hot and a cold water side. The hot water side, as I mentioned in the last video, is heated by an electric heater. We'll look at that again in a second. And then the cold water side is supplied directly from the water pump. And that then runs back through the van to the two main water consumers. Over here on this side is the kitchen sink, and over here on this side is the shower. And that's kind of where that stuff goes. Of course, once the water goes through both of those locations, it then turns into grey water, and then you have to collect that because you can't just dump it on the floor in most places. You can in some, but you want to be able to collect it if you can. And so the grey water will be collected into grey water tanks, which you can then empty at either an RV dump station or into nature if you're in the appropriate location and you haven't used the bad kind of soap. So that's kind of the water system in a nutshell. Again, we'll take the camera in a second and go through some of that. But also let's talk about the gas system as well. So I am using gas as in propane in the van. It is this big box here is my propane tank. I've gone for a portable 20-pound style propane tank. It's the kind you use for standard grills here in the US, mostly for convenience reasons. You can find these pretty much everywhere in America. You can swap them out easily at some locations as well. They have kind of a swapping system built in, and also they're easy to haul around. And if I wanted to carry a second one, that's definitely feasible to do as a backup. The alternative is an undermount storage tank for the propane. Those are harder to get, they're harder to install. You're going to make sure they're really protected from any gravel or off-roading you might do. And of course, crucially, they're harder to fill because you need to find a real propane filling station rather than just going to, I don't know, a random petrol or gas station being like, oh, they have a big bank of these 20-pound canisters that everyone uses. So that's kind of why I went with this. Again, we'll look inside there and talk more about the specifics of the locker in a bit. But the propane system comes out of there, goes into a regulator, splits off, and then feeds the two main propane consumers in the van. One of those is the air furnace to heat the air in the van. As I mentioned kind of in the last video, propane is so much more energy dense than electricity that you really don't want an electric air heater. And the other options for heating the air are diesel or gasoline. You can kind of like tap the fuel tank in the van and run a little, in this case, gasoline pipe up to it. Those are more convenient, and it's really nice that you can just like fill up the van and fill up both tanks at the same time, because if anything's more, everywhere than these propane tanks, it's gasoline in America. But the problem there is they don't really work well at altitude. let's say above about 5,000 feet. Again, I live above 5,000 feet. The mountains, which are less than half an hour away here, are 7 to 10,000 feet at minimum, probably higher. So I really need to have that ability to go high altitude. So for that reason, propane furnace in the van. The other consumer is going to be the cooktop or stovetop or hob in the kitchen over there, because once you have propane in the van, you may as well run a line forward and use that for cooking. I could use an electric induction stovetop instead, and those are kind of convenient and they're not as messy and there's less combustion products, but I always have that option anyway. The one I have is going to have a little cover that goes over it, so at worst it's still work surface you can use. So that's the overall view of both of these systems. What I'm going to do now is we're going to start by going through the details of the water system. So I'm going to take the camera, we're going to go down here into the garage, and I'm going to show you the tank and pump and heater situation. So let's go do that. So here we are in the garage, the easiest place to film in the entire van, to look at the water system and sort of the exact details of that. And it's kind of, I see here, like kind of tucked all here on the passenger side behind the propane locker to try and be, say, like, you know, this space here is used by utilities, and then the space I'm sitting in the rest of the van will be purely for cargo, and you can kind of stack things here well. There will be a wall here eventually, kind of a soft removable one, just to keep any luggage from impacting any of this stuff. But obviously for filming purposes, that's not here yet, and so you can see all of this. So let's start at the beginning, which is the water tank. So as I mentioned, this here is my water tank. It is 32 US gallons. It kind of sits under the seat, which is kind of in the area just behind the wall here behind me. And that kind of supplies things down here. There's a shut-off valve just in case, through a flexible tube, through a strainer just to make sure any big debris doesn't get into the pump. And then here we have a standard RV water pump. 12 volts, 55 PSI. It's a little bit higher PSI than normal, but that's still pretty decent, and all the plumbing here can happily hold that. Water pump then flows into the accumulator, and the point of the accumulator basically is to keep the pressure in the system in a way where the pump doesn't have to keep sort of turning on and off and fluttering on and off occasionally if you're not using all the pressure. Technically, this pump doesn't need an accumulator, but the nice thing is this will stop the pump short cycling anyway, and it will just generally help the system be a little bit quieter, reducing a little bit of water. This doesn't even need to come on. You can just use the pressure in the accumulator. So from the accumulator, it then flows through the start of the PEX piping. I'll talk about the PEX piping in a second. We have here sort of a drain valve. This has like a long flexible hose in it, so if I want to drain the whole system, I can just open that and pull that out and pop it into a bucket. Also a handy way of getting cold water for washing stuff off out the back if you need it. And then it flows up behind the propane locker here where you can't see it, and then tees off into two places. One is this cold water branch you can see coming over here. That's the main cold water branch then for the rest of the system and goes to everything else. And then its second one goes into this 12 volt water heater. Now the water heater obviously heats the water, cold water goes in, there's a little pressure relief valve under here, which if it gets overpressure will release and it will dump the water out through the bottom of the van. There's a small hole for that made. And then otherwise hot water comes out of the top of this and then flows through a red pipe back here, and then what it does from there is it goes into a temperature mixing valve. So the key thing is this is not a very big water boiler. I think it's only about 6 liters, so like, you know, maybe less than a couple of gallons even. And you might think, Andrew, that's not enough for a shower, and you'd be absolutely right, it's not enough for a single shower. But the wonder is you can mix it, because it doesn't cost any more power to heat half as much water twice as much and then mix it down with cold water afterwards. And so this water boiler is set to a very, very high temperature, a one that is dangerously scalding if you touch the output yourself. But then its output goes straight into this thermostatic mixing valve, which is set with a separate cold water input to mix the water down to a reasonable safe temperature you might use for washing dishes or taking a shower. What that means is for every liter of water that comes out of the boiler, you kind of get 2 liters of water coming out of the mixing valve because it's pulling in cold water as well. And then effectively you've doubled the capacity of hot water you have in this small space. So that's the plan for how this works. We'll see how it works in actuality out on the road, but I've tested it, it all seems to work well here, at least in the shop. So with those two systems, basically you then end up with a hot and a cold sort of water main line inside the van. Now these run over to here, over on the passenger side here, where they split, and then you can kind of see behind me here, this pair goes over to the shower, and these are the cut-off valves for that side if you want to drain it or work on it. And then a second pair goes under the seat, just above the water tank itself, and forward to the sink. So let's go and look at under the sink and see how that stuff looks under there as well. So here we are under this kitchen sink in the sort of front passenger side of the van. And you can see here the other end of the fresh water tank. This is kind of, you know, stretches again under this seat. You can kind of see here behind me. And then a whole load of other stuff all crammed in here to try and save space. And I'll try and go through it one by one. Let's start with these. There is a big old tube here, and then there's a smaller one back here you can just about see. Those are the fill lines for the water tank. So this big one is where the water goes in. The small one is the vent line, so the air can escape as you're filling it with water and displacing the air. And those are going to kind of go forward into a little filling port just behind the main sliding door of the van here, and kind of the back of the kitchen work surface. And I'll show you a bit more of that overview and how things look later in the video when I go through the rest of the changes, but the kitchen being here is of course a big change. With the water tank, then there is back here, you can kind of see there's red and blue supply lines. Those are the other ends of the T's from back in the garage. There are cut-off valves on each of them behind here, and then a separate kind of cut-off valve coming off the cold water line upwards. Now there's reasons for that, of course. The two main supply lines here go into these steel braided hoses, and they go up into the sink's tap in here, and they're the main water supply. But the branch for the cold water comes up through some flexible plastic piping into this, which is my water filter, and through some more plastic piping up into a separate drinking water tap that's next to the kitchen sink. So the idea here is the main lines have high pressure, they have high flow, they're for washing dishes and stuff like that. When you want to drink water, you want a little bit extra protection against maybe what you have in the water where it came from. So for that reason, it comes here through the water filter, and then you can drink that from the separate, much lower flow tap. You couldn't really get good dishwashing with it, but it's plenty enough for filling up water glasses and the like. So that's kind of how the freshwater supply works here. As you can see, there is also a U-bend, or technically an S-bend in this case, where the grey water will come down out of the sink and then go at some point in the future down out of the bottom of the van. But as you can see here, there's nothing here right now. That's because my friend the bucket is the current grey water system for the van. And in my infinite wisdom, I have placed this sink directly above the suspension bracing for the van down here. So I can't actually drill down through the floor here. It'd have to be more forward of this point, sort of over there. And so at some point I'm going to reroute this plumbing and have kind of a lateral line sloping down to drain out further forwards. But for now, I'm going to get sort of a more slimline water container and just use that as the grey water for now. It will do for the first couple of trips as I feel the rest of the van out. But as you can see, that's kind of the rest of the water system here. The shower, which is behind me and behind the camera, is still completely not fitted out. There are two supply lines for plumbing that come up, and then they just stop and are terminated in sort of stoppers. So that's kind of the last major piece of plumbing water work to be done. But I think with that, it's time to move on to the gas, because the one last thing you can kind of see here is this copper tube resting here. This is the gas supply line for the future stovetop. Now, the stovetop is not here yet. It has, I think, a 3 or 4 month lead time, and I ordered it 2-3 months ago. So hopefully it will get here soonish. But until then, this is just here and terminated out of the way. Obviously, when it arrives, I'm going to take this, unbend it, and we'll connect it upwards. But let's go back into the garage and see where this comes from and what the rest of the gas supply system looks like. So we're back here behind the propane locker to look at the gas piping this time. Now, gas piping in this van is all done using this copper pipe. You can use, I guess, flexible rubber piping for propane, but it doesn't do very well under repeated motion. It's not really meant for installation in a vehicle like this, so this copper stuff, believe it or not, actually is the better choice. And crucially, with copper fittings, what you can do is you can do flare fittings, what all these fittings here are. They are purely mechanical fittings for doing, you know, anything under pressure like this, like air or propane or other gases. And crucially, they're rated up to 300 PSI, which is way, way more than is in this piping. And while they're a little bit tricky to flare, you're gonna kind of get this tool and like take the end of the pipe, put the nut over, flare the end, then pop the fitting on, screw it down. I will say that unlike the water plumbing, which we'll talk about the PEX in a second here, this stuff was leak-free first time. I did a lot of care and attention obviously in all the joints. I'm pretty scared of propane leaking and becoming poisonous or explosive, but in the end I ran the test with a bubbling liquid. I brought my gas detector out and swept all the joints, and yeah, this stuff is pretty solid first time out. So as you can see here, kind of just comes out of the regulator, which is just behind here inside the propane locker. There's a T. This line goes forward to the kitchen area where you saw the stovetop earlier. Then it's shut off here in case you need to maintain it. And then another line runs down here to this green box. You can just about see there. That green box is the propane air furnace. And again, there's another shut off right here, just because one of the things I've learned from watching people who know what they're doing is if you're doing plumbing, you can never have too many shut-offs. Like one each side of an appliance often is the best thing. So both the water and the gas system here have an almost ludicrous number of shut-offs just in case I need to maintain them. So, you know, talking about shut-offs and piping, one thing I didn't get to yet is PEX. So obviously copper here for the gas. Reasonably easy to work with, but bending it and doing these like radius bends here properly is a little bit of a pain. You don't want to kink it and so on. For water plumbing, however, there's a couple of options. Now, copper piping and things was pretty standard for a while, and you would use what's called sweat fittings. Those are the ones you kind of solder on. Those are a massive pain, and bending them to fit is kind of annoying. And so the best thing, in my opinion, is PEX. PEX is this. It's kind of a bendy plastic pipe. It comes in a couple of forms, PEX A and PEX B. PEX B is the cheap one. When you use it, you kind of have like this crimp fitting, like you crimp things on. It seems pretty mechanically reliable and it's pretty decent, but nothing, in my opinion, beats PEX A, which is what this is. PEX A is a polymer that kind of remembers its shape and contracts back to it. And so what you can do with PEX A, and for all these fittings, they're called expansion fittings. You take your pipe, you put it in this big tool called an expander. It kind of sits there and over a series of sort of processes expands the pipe out to a bit more than its normal radius. And you have a little sort of plastic ring on it too at this point to kind of give it extra tension. And then you've got about 10 seconds to slip it onto the fitting, and then it will start contracting back down to its normal size. And after about a minute or so, it is very, very firmly on there. It's shrunk back down to its previous size. Getting it off is, I would say, probably a nightmare. You may as well just cut the pipe instead. But crucially, it's really quick, it's really clean, and it's really hard to screw up. And in fact, of all the PEX expansion fittings in the van, when I ran a pressure test with all the water pressure turned on, none of those leaked. The only things that leaked were the ones down here on the pumps. Those are standard threaded NPT fittings, you know, US standard for water plumbing. And what I had done is I'd forgotten to put some pipe tape on the connections where a plastic thread met a metal thread. Obviously, metal on metal threading does need pipe tape. I was unsure if plastic on metal does. Turns out it absolutely does. So those ones leaked. None of these PEX joints did. None of the gas flare joints did. So I think honestly, all in all, on average, pretty good leak results in terms of testing both these systems the first time. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the plumbing. It seems to work well. The water system is good. I get hot water, I get cold water. The sink works even with a bucket as a temporary solution. And I know that once the shower is here, obviously building the shower pan and that drainage will be the main challenge there. But the supply side of things won't be too bad. Standard mixing valve in the wall, hot and cold PEX connections into it, and you can't go far wrong there. So yeah, plumbing is all good. With that done though, we should probably talk about the rest of the van because lots happened. So I'm going to get out of this tiny space. We're going to go up to the cabin and talk about some of the big changes I've done in the last few weeks. And here we are. Welcome to what's becoming my cozy home away from home. You see quite a lot of the interior is really coming together now. The kitchen countertop here is in. There is a sink and a fresh water tap here as well. Sink has a nice cover you can use as a surface, and then of course the cover comes off and then the tap folds up. Lovely innovation there, big fan of that one. So that's really nice. As well as a sink, we have some of these upper cabinets with bottoms on them. You can see here we've got the light strips along the side, and in fact those light strips do indeed change color and I can change them to any color of the rainbow I like, which is always very fun, so that's great. As well as those, there is direct underlighting here above the kitchen area, and then you can see here in the ceiling above me, 2 of the 3 ceiling panels are done, the back 2, and there are LED lights in there as well, so plenty of lighting in here. There's also this separate little work surface here over the fridge, which is in this gap underneath. This also, same material as this, both of these are butcher block, 1.5 inch thick, and there's also a little extra auxiliary light up there just to give you a little extra light if you're working on something. So this is kind of the kitchen prep space, which is super nice. The shower is honestly the main thing now that's totally unfinished. This is just, you know, kind of an empty box that I need to start building out the shower pan and the toilet mounting and stuff, but there's still plenty of, as you can see, wiring and stuff behind here that needs to get done, so I'm leaving that open until I finish all the wiring. But yeah, otherwise some, you know, wall paneling, some trim. I am choosing to keep it a little bit, you know, utilitarian. These nuts will be visible, so these bolts, sorry, will be visible in the final thing. But a lot of the smaller spaces starting to be closed up, and I've got some H section here finally to join my wood panels together and eliminate those weird gaps. So that's kind of the front section done pretty well. I'm going to move the camera back a bit and we'll talk more about the rear section here, because that's honestly even more exciting. So here we are in the rear section. Now, obviously, these kind of benches and stuff were here mostly last time I did a record. The electrical cabinet was open last time. I was kind of recording that just before I put all this stuff on. But as you can see here, there's kind of, it's fully closed off now. There's a little lid here that lifts up so you can get inside easily. And then I started cutting out my foam that I'm going to then have to go and sew some covers for to make seat cushions. So that's kind of roughly sized out, but it's kind of, apart from the foam, almost entirely done back here. Another feature is this is my sliding table. This slides out from underneath the bed. Really lovely use of space there. It kind of sits right up against the aluminium framing of the bed, so no really wasted space in the cargo compartment, and I mean, it's pretty strong. You can definitely put some meals and stuff on there or a laptop and work from here, so that's really nice. And of course has some nice soft closing action on that. Of course, the elephant in the room here is the mattress. This I got custom made from a really nice company, just custom makes fair mattresses to your dimensions you specify. They even do corner cutouts. So there's 2 pieces. This top one is smaller and kind of fits in the gap where I'm currently sitting as the bed comes out. And then this bigger piece here is kind of just for the whole back section and has notches to go around those back pillars back there to kind of give you as much room as possible in the full bed experience. So I will pull that out and show you the full bed in a second. There's one more detail which you can kind of see the back of here. I'm going to bring the camera around and show you kind of the little control center here for the electricals and heating and stuff. So let's do that and we'll pull the bed out. So here's the other side of that wall of the shower, and as you can see here, it's a couple of important pieces. First of all, smoke alarm, never leave home without it, very important. It's a pretty small van, I doubt I'd, you know, not feel a fire, but I always think it's better safe than sorry with that kind of stuff. And then we have some switches. So these ones here are the main lights. So this is the light strips, you can see there. And then these 2 are overhead lightings for different sections of the back area here. You can't really see them, but obviously it gets dimmer. Top here, ones here, these are the shower controls. Left one here is the water heater. And if you'll notice, there is a little red light here that tells you the heater is on. The heater is the biggest power consumer in the whole van. You do not want to leave it on. It will use up a lot of your power. And so our little red friend here reminds you left it on in case you did. I might at some point put a timer on that as a secondary backup. This right one here with the shower lights, but of course nothing in the shower yet, so that doesn't work at all. Finally, the little control screen you saw for the electricals in the last video now lives here. And so you've got that nice easy way of looking and seeing what's happening and how charge is going. And right now the van is fully charged as it should be because it's plugged into the wall over there. So yeah, that's kind of this wall. This whole living space is kind of built out really well. And so now I'm going to go pull the bed out and you can see how that looks and how it fits in. And yeah, then we'll do a wrap up. So, as you can see, the bed, once unfolded, is more than big enough for even my tall stature. I think this comes out at about 6'4" in the end, so That's enough for a very comfortable sleep. And even width-wise, this is, I believe, bigger than a king-size bed in the US, so you could get 2 people very easily left right here, and that will work really well. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. Also, like the number of slats underneath here, I was worried, you know, wouldn't give enough support, but they certainly do. The mattress has enough of a sort of solid base that the 6 slats across do totally work, and yeah, I'm really happy with this. It's also really comfortable, crucially. It is a level up even from my camping cot, and that is, I think, a bit of a luxury if you ask me. So all in all, really happy with the bed and how it came out. Obviously, I do have to sew some covers for these mattresses. I'm probably going to sew individual sheets for this piece and this piece, so you can kind of move them around when they're sort of already somewhat dressed up. And then standard, probably, duvet / comforter and pillows on top of that. So a decent amount of sewing in my future. You know, I've got this, I've got the cushions for the seats underneath this section here. But all in all, I think it's really progressing well. So yeah, that's kind of the main parts of the build here. Obviously, you know, there's still some stuff left to do. It's getting down to it now, right? Like the main big piece left is the shower, which obviously, as you can see here, is still kind of completely barren, but building that out shouldn't be too bad. Going to use some FRP panels for the walls, going to use probably waterproof plywood with some plastic for the floor. I'm going to slope it on a simple angle to a linear drain to try and get that as simple to build as possible. I don't want to do the traditional like sort of mud pit thing they do in houses here, and I also don't want to have to go order a custom tub or like bottom for the shower. So I'd rather just build that and add a sort of waterproofed wood and make sure there's a fully waterproof plastic layer underneath it. Other things I need doing, obviously, these upper cabinets, as you can see here, kind of barren. I have one of them built. That one is over on the bench in the workshop because I'm building 5 more of it to go in all the other spots along here. So that's kind of a lot of cabinetry in my future. There's also a lot of cabinetry in terms of under the sink, which is just here off camera. You saw under there earlier, it's kind of barren. There needs to be sort of cabinets to store food and other things and sort of bigger pieces under there. There needs to be a drawer above the fridge for cutlery and the like. And then one more of these roof panels goes sort of above where the camera is, around the fan and all that stuff. But that is kind of it, right? I'm starting to get to the point now where I can list the things I need to do sort of off the top of my head. And that's a big improvement from where I was earlier in the build in terms of like, it all seemed impossible. There was so much to do. I could work on 25 things at once. And now it's honestly really all coming together. The trick, of course, as always, is the finish and the trim. There are places in the van where it's a little bit obvious that it's somewhat home built. I've tried to hide my crimes there as much as possible. So for example, behind this light strip here is a pretty bad join of this wall to kind of this framing here, but you can't see it because it's behind the light strip. And that's kind of been my, you know, looking around how houses are built, right? That's how you do it in houses. That's why you have skirting boards, why you have trim and molding, is to hide all the joins. And so I'll be doing a lot of that here, painting a few of the ones that are smaller and better cut. All the curved walls, honestly, the biggest problem. They're a massive pain to get joining properly, but it's still going pretty well. I'm pretty happy. And yeah, like, you know, next video is going to be kind of more of a summary catch up of the next random cluster of things I've done. And, you know, it's going to be a lot of woodworking, a lot of cabinetry. The sewing, I might start on that, but I might leave that till more of the end maybe, because I kind of like to get to the headspace with sewing and, you know, clean everything off and bring the sewing machine out and make sure there's no dust or anything anywhere. So yeah, lots to do, but not as much as before. Feeling good about it, already kind of livable in. So yeah, good progress. I have to, of course, go and start doing just a lot of cabinetry. That's probably my next thing after this video is recorded. So I'm gonna shut this off and go and do that. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you next time with lots of footage of random stuff. See you then.